Hello and welcome to Talking Tolkien and the second chapter of Frodo's journey. Today we will be venturing out of Crickhollow, through the old forest, and if we get there in one piece, hopefully head towards Bree for a well-deserved mug of ale. Before we start, if you've come here watching chapter 1, this is not quite the spot where I ended that video. At the time I had to look around for Fatty, who was supposed to meet us at the house in Crickhollow, but I couldn't find him. Now, after I've looked around, it turns out the error was mine. Fatty wasn't there because I had the wrong house at Crickhollow. Yep, that's Fatty there, outside the proper house. So if we just pop out here through the front door, up there, that's where I thought was Crickhollow, so we weren't far off. If we look in here, you can see as well the house is quite smashed up. That's from when the Black Riders came looking for Frodo in the ring. Okay, so now we can start the journey properly. Soon after 6 o'clock, the 5 hobbits were ready to start. Fatty Bolger was still yawning. They stole quietly out of the house. Merry went in front, leading a laden pony, and took his way along a path that went through a spinney behind the house, and then cut across several fields. The leaves of trees were glistening, and every twig was dripping. The grass was grey with cold dew. Everything was still, and faraway noises seemed near and clear. Fowls chattering in a yard, someone closing a door of a distant house. In their shed they found the ponies, sturdy little beasts of the kind loved by hobbits, not speedy, but good for a long day's work. They mounted, and soon they were riding off into the mist, which seemed to open reluctantly before them and close forbiddingly behind them. After riding for about an hour, slowly and without talking, they saw the hedge looming suddenly ahead. It was tall and netted over with silver cobwebs. "How are you going to get through this?" asked Fredegar. "Follow me," said Merry, "and you will see." He turned to the left along the hedge, and soon they came to a point where it bent inwards, running along the lip of a hollow. A cutting had been made at some distance from the hedge, and went sloping gently down into the ground. It had walls of brick at the sides, which rose steadily, until suddenly they arched over and formed a tunnel that dived deep under the hedge and came out in the hollow on the other side. It was dark and damp. At the far end it was closed by a gate of thick-set iron bars. Merry got down and unlocked the gate, and when they had all passed through, he pushed it to again. It shut with a clang, and the lock clicked. The sound was ominous. The hobbits now left the tunnel gate and rode across the wide hollow. On the far side was a faint path leading up onto the floor of the forest, 100 yards and more beyond the hedge, but it vanished as soon as it brought them under the trees. Looking back, they could see the dark line of the hedge through the stems of trees that were already thick about them. Looking ahead, they could see only tree trunks of innumerable sizes and shapes, straight or bent, twisted, leaning, squat or slender, smooth or gnarled and branched, and all the stems were green or grey with moss and slimy, shaggy growths. Frodo began to wonder if it were possible to find a way through, and if he had been right to make the others come into this abominable wood. Merry was looking from side to side, and seemed already uncertain which way to go. Pippin noticed it. "It's not taken you long to lose us," he said. But at that moment, Merry gave a whistle of relief and pointed ahead. "Well, well," he said, "these trees do shift. This is the bonfire glade in front of us, or I hope so, but the path to it seems to have moved away." The light grew clearer as they went forward. Suddenly they came out of the trees and found themselves in a wide circular space. There was sky above them, blue and clear to their surprise, for down under the forest roof they had not been able to see the rising morning and the lifting of the mist. The sun was not, however, high enough yet to shine down into the clearing, though its light was on the treetops. The leaves were all thicker and greener about the edges of the glade, enclosing it with an almost solid wall. No tree grew there, only rough grass and many tall plants, stalky and faded hemlocks, and wood parsley, fireweed seeding into fluffy ashes, and rampant nettles and thistles. A dreary place, but it seemed a charming and cheerful garden after the close forest. At the far side of the glade there was a break in the wall of trees and a clear path beyond it. They could see it running on into the wood, wide in places and open above, though every now and again the trees drew in and overshadowed it with their dark boughs. Up this path they rode. The path stopped climbing and became for a while nearly level. The dark trees drew aside, and ahead they could see the path going almost straight forward. Before them, but some distance off, there stood a green hilltop, treeless, rising like a bald head out of the encircling wood. The path seemed to be making directly for it. They now hurried forward again, delighted with the thought of climbing out for a while above the roof of the forest. The path dipped, and then again began to climb upwards, leading them at last to the foot of the steep hillside. There it left the trees and faded into the turf. The wood stood all round the hill like thick hair that ended sharply in a circle round a shaven crown. So the hobbits decided to stay at the top of this hill for a time to have a rest and eat their elevenses. By the time they left it was after midday, and they found themselves getting drawn inexplicably towards the river Withywindle, which was the place they were trying to avoid, as it is, in Merry's words, said to be the queerest part of the whole wood, the centre from which all the queerness comes, as it were. So as the group carry on further, they find themselves getting sleepier and sleepier, until they have to stop and rest by this old willow tree, which we can see here is Old Man Willow. Then Frodo awakens to find that Merry and Pippin have been captured by the tree, which refuses to release them. Frodo starts crying for help, until a strange man named Tom Bombadil appears in the forest and commands Old Man Willow to release the hobbits. They then follow Tom to his house in the forest. As we walk up to the house, here's a reading from Tolkien himself, reading the adventures of Tom Bombadil.
Old Tom Bombadil was a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket was and his boots were yellow. Green were his girdle and his breeches all of leather. He wore in his tall hat a swan wing feather. He lived up under hill, where the Withywindle ran from a grassy well down into the dingle. Old Tom in summertime walked about the meadows, gathering the buttercups, running after shadows, tickling the bumblebees that buzzed among the flowers, sitting by the waterside for hours upon hours. There his beard dangled long down into the water. Up came Goldberry, the river woman's daughter, pulled Tom's hanging hair. In he went a-wallowing, under the water lilies bubbling and a-swallowing. "Hey, Tom Bombadil, whither are you going?" said fair Goldberry. "Bubbles you are blowing, frightening the finny fish and the brown water rat, startling the dab chicks and drowning your featherhead." "You bring it back again, there's a pretty maiden," said Tom Bombadil. "I do not care for wading. Go down, sleep again where the pools are shady, far below willow roots, little water lady."
The four hobbits stepped over the wide stone threshold and stood still, blinking. They were in a long, low room, filled with the light of lamps swinging from the beams of the roof, and on the table of dark polished wood stood many candles, tall and yellow, burning brightly. The hobbits stayed the night of September 26th at the house of Tom Bombadil, and then, because the next day was raining, they stayed that night as well. To keep things moving, I'm going to resist the urge to start talking in detail about Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, apart from to answer one of the most mysterious questions in the whole of The Lord of the Rings. Who is Tom Bombadil? Well, he is. And as with my previous video about Frodo's journey, this is a map from Lord of the Rings Online, with a red line showing the route that they took today, which was day 4 of the journey, September 26th. Their way wound along the floor of the hollow, and round the green feet of a steep hill into another deeper and broader valley, and then over the shoulders of further hills, and down their long limbs, and up their smooth sides again, up onto new hilltops and down into new valleys. So after they'd left these downs and were feeling optimistic that they'd covered a decent amount of ground already today, they reached a set of hills that were crowned with green mounds, and on some were standing stones, pointing upwards like jagged teeth out of green gums. Then the hobbits found that they woke suddenly and uncomfortably from a sleep they had never meant to take, and found they were surrounded by heavy fog just as the sun was beginning to set. Soon they were leading their ponies in single file over the rim and down the long northward slope of the hill, down into a foggy sea. As they went down, the mist became colder and damper, and their hair hung lank and dripping on their foreheads. When they reached the bottom, it was so chill that they halted and got out cloaks and hoods, which soon became bedewed with grey drops. Then, mounting their ponies, they went slowly on again, feeling their way by the rise and fall of the ground. They were steering, as well as they could guess, for the gate-like opening at the far northward end of the long valley, which they had seen in the morning. Once they were through the gap, they had only to keep on in anything like a straight line, and they were bound in the end to strike the road. Their thoughts did not go beyond that, except for a vague hope that perhaps away beyond the downs there might be no fog. So as they were trying to navigate the fog, Frodo found himself separated from the other hobbits. He then stumbled near to a great barrow. His knees gave and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were two eyes, very cold, though lit with a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip, stronger and colder than iron, seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. So here in blue we can see the route that Frodo took and how he got lost on the Barrow-downs before he spent an unexpected night in a barrow. When he came to himself again, for a moment he could recall nothing except a sense of dread. Then suddenly he knew that he was imprisoned, caught hopelessly. He was in a barrow. A Barrow-wight had taken him, and he was probably already under the dreadful spells of the Barrow-wights, about which whispered tales spoke. So as Frodo looked around, he saw the other hobbits were lying unconsciously nearby. He resolved that he'd do everything he could to get them out of this barrow, and then he remembered the verse that Tom Bombadil had taught him to use if they ever needed his help in this area. After reciting the verse, Tom Bombadil appeared, opened the barrow, and rescued the hobbits. At last they set off. They led their ponies down the hill, and then mounting, they trotted quickly along the valley. They looked back and saw the top of the old mound on the hill, and from it the sunlight on the gold went up like a yellow flame. Then they turned a shoulder of the downs, and it was hidden from view. Though Frodo looked about him on every side, he saw no sign of the great stone standing like a gate, and before long they came to the northern gap and rode swiftly through, and the land fell away before them. It was a merry journey with Tom Bombadil trotting gaily beside them, or before them, on Fatty Lumpkin, who could move much faster than his girth promised. Tom sang most of the time, but it was chiefly nonsense, or else perhaps a strange language unknown to the hobbits, an ancient language whose words were mainly those of wonder and delight. They climbed down and out of the dyke and through a gap in the wall, and then Tom turned due north, for they'd been bearing somewhat to the west. The land was now open and fairly level, and they quickened their pace, but the sun was already sinking low when at last they saw a line of tall trees ahead, and they knew that they had come back to the road after many unexpected adventures. They galloped their ponies over the last furlongs and halted under the long shadow of the trees. They galloped their ponies over the last furlongs and halted under the long shadow of the trees. At this point the hobbits said goodbye to Tom Bombadil and set off on their way along the road to Bree. They now mounted their ponies and rode off silently into the evening. Darkness came down quickly as they plodded slowly downhill and up again, until at last they saw lights twinkling some distance ahead. Before them rose Bree Hill barring the way, a dark mass against misty stars, and under its western flank nestled a large village. Towards it they now hurried, desiring only to find a fire and a door between them and the night. The hobbits rode up on a gentle slope, passing a few detached houses, and drew up outside the inn. The houses looked large and strange to them. Even from the outside, the inn looked a pleasant house to familiar eyes. It had a front on the road, and two wings running back on land partly cut out of the lower slopes of the hill, so that at the rear, the second floor windows were level with the ground. There was a wide arch leading to a courtyard between the two wings, and on the left under the arch there was a large doorway reached by a few broad steps. The door was open and light streamed out of it. Above the arch there was a lamp, and beneath it swung a large signboard. A fat white pony reared up on its hind legs. Under the door was painted in white letters, "The Prancing Pony by Barleyman Butterbur." Most of the lower windows showed lights behind thick curtains. The company was in the big common room of the inn. The gathering was large and mixed, as Frodo discovered when his eyes got used to the light. This came chiefly from a blazing log fire, but the three lamps hanging from the beams were dim and half veiled in smoke. Barleyman Butterbur was standing near the fire, talking to a couple of dwarves and one or two strange-looking men. On the benches were various folk, men of Bree, a collection of local hobbits, sitting chattering together, a few more dwarves and other vague figures, difficult to make out away in the shadows and corners. The hobbits arrived in Bree on the evening of 29th of September. After they arrived here, they spoke with the landlord, Barleyman Butterbur, who gave them a hobbit-sized room in the Prancing Pony for the night. They also met Strider here, who would join them for the journey to Rivendell. And finally we can see the map of the progress made throughout this video, with today's route in green. So we'll leave Frodo and the hobbits in the relative comfort of the Prancing Pony for the end of this chapter of Frodo's journey. As ever, if you enjoyed the video, then a like and subscribe will continue to encourage me to keep working on the next part, where we'll be heading for the bleakness of Weathertop. Until then,